I'm Davy, and I'm awesome! And welcome to Davy's Awesome Wrestling, where I review wrestling-related things, all from the perspective of a fan, not an insider. So recently, Hulu has finally gotten the entire Season 3 of Dark Side of the Ring. Which means I've been able to watch it. And since the 2-season review I did last year did so well, let's go ahead and get into Season 3 of Dark Side of the Ring. Episode 1, Brian Pillman, Part 1. Which means Episode 2 was Brian Pillman Part 2. This was another one of those stories that needed a two-parter, and I'm glad they did. Talking about the life of Brian Pillman, why he had that raspy voice, how he got into wrestling, how he worked the wrestling world into thinking that he was legit crazy to get more money. And it worked, leading to his car accident that severely altered his career, making it to where he was able to come back, but never be the same again, which of course led to his drug problems that later caused his heart attack. Sad story, and even sadder was the story of the kids he had left behind. His 2 daughters and Brian Pillman Jr. But ultimately has come full circle. His sister took his kids eventually and raised them, and they've all been happy, and now Brian Pillman Jr. is doing pretty well for himself in AEW. It was great to me seeing this because I was such a Brian Pillman fan. Like, I remember back when I was a kid and I wasn't a big WCW fan, I did remember flying Brian Pillman. Mostly because my mom bought me a pack of toys that came with him in it. But still, I saw him on TV, I stopped. Episode 3, The Ultraviolence of Nick Gage. Nick Gage, who right now is basically the legend of the death match. He's the guy that currently we know if we see him on a card,
there will be blood.
But going through his life, growing up, becoming a fan of death matches, then getting into the death matches, and having one of the most controversial death matches ever, where a few seconds in he took such a nasty cut on an artery in his arm that they had to airlift him out of there before he bled to death, which technically he did die for a few minutes before they revived him. And then of course his struggle of getting into drugs, which led of course to his downfall, him having no place to live, him robbing a bank, and I did like that they got his friend John Moxley in there to kind of comment on the fact that every time he came out to the ring he wore a face mask, yet he goes to rob a bank and does it with nothing. And how he went to jail, but how he eventually got out, started putting his life back together. Then his brother killed himself. And even talks about his well-documented match that he had with David Arquette that was controversial, where David Arquette got his neck nicked and went to the hospital. Episode 4, Collision in Korea. Documenting the infamous story of the time WCW and New Japan Pro Wrestling teamed up to go put on a show in North Korea. Communist North Korea, at the time being run by Kim Jong-il, the father of Kim Jong-un, and it turned out it was a bad idea. Duh! The wrestlers were constantly in fear of their lives and their freedom. They found out that North Korea was running them on a very tight leash, limited everything they did, phone calls, entertainment, television. Just overall turned out to be one of the worst ideas that WCW ever had. Although Eric Bischoff prides himself on the fact that he had over 200,000 people in an arena, and Vince McMahon never pulled that many people into one arena. Fair enough, but truth be told, that's because Vince McMahon's arenas get packed in voluntarily. Episode 5, Becoming Warrior. Basically, if you have the DVD Always Believe, the story of the Ultimate Warrior, it's like that, except complete opposite. I wouldn't say that this little documentary is as one-sided and mean as the self-destruction of the Ultimate Warrior that came out years ago. In fact, I wouldn't call it mean. I would just say that it was like giving the other side of the story of Ultimate Warrior. When Always Believe had come out, it was the DVD telling the Warrior's side of his rise and success and leaving WWF and everything. But this kind of told the side of people around him. The people that, yeah, thought he was a little nutty, but also just how he did get a really big, overly inflated ego, lost his marriage, started making bad decisions, but eventually did repackage himself and become a motivational speaker, although they put that into question. What I like about it, though, is if you combine that and Always Believe, you get a more clear story of what happened. Because the thing is, there's always a few sides to the story. His downfall, leaving WWF, parts of it were his fault, parts of it were their fault. It's just how things work in real life. Episode 6, In the Shadow of Grizzly Smith. The story of the children of Grizzly Smith. As has been long known, the wrestlers Rockin' Robin, Sam Houston, and Jake Roberts were all children of Grizzly Smith. They were siblings in the wrestling business. It also grabbed one of the other siblings that was not in the wrestling business and talked about the sibling that is no longer with us. But how well as they were Grizzly Smith's kids, most of them did not have the same mothers. And they weren't really very close as brothers and sisters because that was by design. Grizzly Smith did that. What was interesting about this is, as a fan, we'd heard stories about Grizzly Smith and that he was kind of mean and abusive, but we had no idea the levels of debauchery that he was into. And the thing is, if he were still alive today, he'd definitely be in the canceled category. And the thing about that, if you watch this and see the stories, whether you're against cancel culture or for cancel culture, you'd be like, you know what? Go for it. Episode 7, The Dynamite Kid, chronicling the life of Tom Wellington, a great wrestler who most of us remember as one half of the British Bulldogs. But what a lot of us diehard fans like me remember is that he was basically the father of that fast-paced, strong style that we have nowadays. Now, they keep renaming it Japanese strong style, American strong style. We even got Jonah saying New Zealand strong style. Strong style. But Tom Wellington is the guy who came up with that to overcompensate for the fact that he was a much smaller guy than the average wrestler he was going after. Because remember, he grew up in a time when all wrestlers were like these big, jacked up freaks of nature. And he was just a really buff, normal-sized dude. But this did lead to him having a Napoleon complex. He was always very angry, always starting things. He had his friends, his really, really close friends, but he also had his bitter enemies. And of course, it chronicled his back injury that would later end his career and put him in a wheelchair, which led to his depression, which led to him being violent and angry to the point that it ended his marriage and he had to go back to the UK and never see his kids except for one little reunion with one of them until he died. It was a sad story. Episode 8, probably the most controversial episode of this season. The Plane Ride from Hell. For years as a wrestling fan, I had heard about the Plane Ride from Hell. I constantly wanted to know more details about it, so I would watch student interviews with guys talking about the Plane Ride from Hell who were on that plane. But this was the first time we were going to get like an overall story and real glimpse into what happened in the Plane Ride from Hell. As a wrestling fan, if you are a wrestling fan and you want to know, I would suggest please don't watch this. It changes the perspective completely. To the point, I'm not going to lie, as a wrestling fan, some of these wrestlers I was very disgusted with. The biggest controversy was, of course, Ric Flair. They were canceling him because of what he did to the flight attendant, pinning her in the galley and sexually assaulting her. Not really hurting her, but definitely scaring her to the point that I'm sure she thought something was about to happen. And because of this, there was efforts to cancel him. Tommy Dreamer basically did get canceled for his comments in this episode. He's back working with Impact again now, but he's probably on a very short leash. I'm not going to get into too much of it because what more am I going to add to the conversation except to say that, yeah, even I was really disgusted with it and like, dude, that was horrible. But what I will say is the positive note is that ever since this happened, WWE has taken steps to make sure that something like this never happens again. Not to mention, though, because of this, they've also been getting a new generation of wrestlers that are really not the ridiculous, immature party animals that they had back in that generation. However, like most people, I will say, it was inexcusable. Episode 9, The Double Life of Chris Kanyon. Chris Kanyon was a great wrestler. I wouldn't say he was one of my favorites. I don't know why, he just never really grabbed me, but I didn't hate him. I did get entertained by him, especially that silver-plated championship belt he had. But this one chronicled his life of growing up as a gay man, getting into wrestling as a gay man, and not being able to come out because, truth be told, in his time, they talked about it and they were absolutely right. If he would have come out, they would have made him a knockoff Gorgeous George or Adrian Adonis or something like that. And dealing with that struggle, plus the struggle of his own mental problems. He was manic depressive, bipolar, paranoid schizophrenic. So combine that with hiding a very big secret about yourself, such a deadly cocktail. I really felt for the guy watching this. But then how, in 2006, he finally came out of the closet and didn't really do anything for him. Because by 2006, when he had finally come out, even though he was the first openly gay wrestler out there, it was now a culture where people weren't that shocked by it. Just really didn't care. I mean, we were thought good about it, but we just we didn't get all up in a tizzy about it. I'm sure some people did. I'm sure there were those people who just really have to be in everybody else's business, grumbling like, oh my god, gay wrestler. But most of the people had a reaction probably like I did, which was just reading a dirt sheet about it and going, oh, Chris Canyon's gay. And how this not really leading to where he wanted it to be, which was being that positive, out front role model for other gay people struggling, and how this really didn't boost his career, so that really led to his depression getting even worse to the point that he did finally commit suicide. Rest in peace, Chris Kanyon. Episode 10, Blood and Wire, Onita's FMW. This was really cool for me because I had read about FMW in certain other people's books, like Mick Foley went into it quite a bit, he was in FMW. Chris Jericho went into it a little bit, he had a stint in FMW. But most of us really haven't gotten the full story of FMW. Well, here it is. It was a promotion started in Japan by hardcore legend Onita, where it was basically the father to promotions like ECW and promotions that are around today like CCW. It all started from FMW, Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling. They had weird names in Japan. How Onita brought it up from nothing and made that promotion that, like ECW, you could see some good, nice, fast-paced wrestling, and you could also see death matches, exploding ring matches, glass, barbed wire, fire! And then after he had made himself enough money, sold the company to somebody else who ran it into the ground and then killed themselves over it. Episode 11, Bikers, Bombs, and Bedlam. Johnny K-9. Johnny K-9 was an independent wrestler who had little stints in some of the big promotions here and there, but honestly, I had never heard of this guy until reading about him in Chris Jericho's book, because Chris Jericho roomed with him for a time. Apparently this guy was true to the crew. That's the only interest I really had in it, was seeing his life story based on what I'd read from Chris Jericho's book. I kind of wanted to learn a little bit more about this guy. Turns out, he was kooky. Episode 12, The Many Faces of Luna Vachon. Ah, the legend Luna Vachon. I remember being a little kid and seeing her walk Bam Bam Bigelow down the aisle. And thinking, that woman looks like she wants to kill me. She was one of, if not the best, women wrestling villain there ever was. And it was really cool. And I can't say I was a fan of Luna Vachon because of the times of I remember her being there was when I was little and liked who I was supposed to like and hated who I was supposed to hate. So of course I hated her growing up. But as an adult, I look back and realize, man, hating her was fun. Which to me is the best heels. It's just when you realize how much fun you had hating them. And you did have a lot of fun hating Luna Vachon. It went into her life and how she became a Vachon by adoption and wanting to be in wrestling. But being a woman in wrestling during her time was not easy. Wasn't respected like it is today. If they could even have decent matches, nobody cared, sadly. And it, to me, is a crime that she was never, ever a WWE Women's Champion. Especially because, I'm going to say it, during the time of Alundra Blaze being the Women's Champion, it was so boring because she had no real competition. Which is why, in my opinion, why Alundra Blaze faded into obscurity for a while. Because how can we be interested when you don't have a good villain? Batman needs the Joker. Superman needs Lex Luthor. Popeye needs Bluto. But the stupid thing about that is they had the perfect villain for Alundra Blaze. Her and Luna Vachon always had great matches, and if they would have put some effort into that, that could have been the first women's revolution. But sadly, it never came to be. Episode 13, Extreme and Obscene. Rob Black's XPW. Normally, when I hear about a promotion that got some steam and then rose a little bit and fell, I'm very interested in the documentary. Not gonna lie, I wasn't very interested in this one. Probably because at the time XPW was around, obviously I couldn't watch them on television or anything. I lived in Nevada, they were a California-based promotion. But I did have a friend who got himself a couple of XPW videotapes, and I watched them with him, and I wasn't impressed. To me, it was the stereotype of ECW. ECW was stereotyped as being nothing but hardcore garbage wrestling, and I still to this day defend it that that's not the truth. They had that mixed in there, and they had a nice mix of that in there for those people who just love brutal barbed wires and blood and guts and all that stuff. But it did also have wrestling. You know, it had Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Dane Malenko, Too Cold Scorpio. I could go on and on. Taz! Whereas XPW had exactly what they said they had. Blood and guts, hardcore, garbage wrestling. It had a couple of wrestlers that went on to be very good wrestlers, like Luke Hawx. But for the most part, it was the stereotype. So it folding because Rob Black put out pornography that was way too obscene. Oh well. Bye. Episode 14, The Steroids Trial. One that I was definitely interested in. One I was hoping that eventually Dark Side of the Ring would get to. Because I was coming up being a wrestling fan around the time that was really in the news. But as fans, it's good to have documentary shows like this because sometimes that's just the problem. We only get little bits of stories. This day and age, you can go on and see shoot interview after shoot interview, but you're only getting little bits, and it was really cool to get the whole story of the steroid trial, the controversial steroid trial that almost ended the WWF, which would have been sad because that would have meant all we were left with was WCW, and, well, ew. And it was also something that helped shape the way wrestling is now. People knock wrestlers and wrestling about steroids and stuff like that, and drug problems, but the truth is, they're sports entertainment, and they're taking care of their athletes a lot more than any other sports franchise out there. So overall, Dark Side of the Ring Season 3 was really good. I wouldn't say I like it more than the first 2 seasons, simply because this season really sparked some controversy. Like, there were a couple of episodes that got people going at it over social media. But what I do love about Dark Side of the Ring, the documentary series overall, besides the fact that it gives us like a much more clearer story of things we've only gotten little bits and pieces of, is that I like that they never present this as being anti-wrestling, which is a lot of what these documentary shows do. Like, wrestling's bad because it ruined this guy's life and it ruined that guy's life. Dark Side of the Ring just kind of gives you the facts and lays it out there so that, yeah, we can spark debates. Well, wrestling was the reason Chris Kanyon killed himself. No, it wasn't. What killed him was his mental problems. And hopefully if you have those kinds of mental problems and you watch that episode, it'll inspire you to get help. And, oh, wrestling's to blame for all these guys doing the steroids. No, it wasn't. They did it themselves. It's one reason with shoot interviews, I won't watch certain people's interviews anymore because I watch them and all they want to do is blame wrestling for everything bad that happened in their life. When truth be told, a lot of the great stuff that happened in your life was because of wrestling. As a wrestling fan, I do say, most of the people who are out there complaining about how wrestling ruined their lives, maybe you should take a minute and think about whose fault it really was. So there you have it. That's my wrestling review this week. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, make sure to hit like, hit subscribe, hit the little bell so you get notifications when I post new videos, and leave a comment. Tell me what you thought of Season 3, Dark Side of the Ring. Love you guys.